Hello, my name is Dione Howard and I'm Vice Chair of the Youth Voices Leadership Team. Welcome to our second season of Leadership is Language, where we are exploring how we can show leadership by the language and communication styles that we use. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wiradjuri people, traditional custodians on the land on which I'm speaking to you from today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm thrilled to introduce the next guest in our Leadership is Language series, Monique White. Monique is an agricultural scientist and consultant that has specialised in the implementation of change and environmental management and sustainability programs on farm, within industry and in the community. Monique works with people who want to make a profitable income from the land while also leaving it in a better condition for future generations. Monique is currently an Assistant Director in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's engagement team based in Murray Bridge in South Australia. Monique's role includes providing strategic engagement advice and supporting development and implementation of organisational engagement plans. Monique also supports a network of regional engagement officers, administers community engagement mechanisms, and supports interagency engagement. Since 1996, Monique has been based in Murray Bridge, holding roles that included developing a land and water management plan on behalf of the dairy industry and managing a wide range of local environmental projects. In her role as an NRM, Natural Resource Management Technical Specialist for Dairy SA and Dairy Australia, Monique also implemented the National Smarter Irrigation for Profit Dairy Extension Program. It's a pleasure to have you joining us for Leadership is Language today. So welcome, Monique.
Thank you very much.
So today we're going to tap into Monique's expertise about how we share the water story. Picture in Agriculture School program surveys have shown us that close to 95% of Australians practice water saving behaviour in the home. Once a value such as this is the social norm, conversations that appear to challenge these values can quickly become contentious. The role of leadership in this space and using the right language is critical if farmers and consumers are going to be allies in the water space in the future. So, Monique, let's get started. First of all, as part of your role in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, you are communicating with growers. What are the sorts of considerations that you need to make before walking into a conversation?
I think the considerations that you make before the conversation are absolutely the key to connecting with people. So I think it's important that we know as much as we can about that group of people that you're going to be talking to. So if they're growers, what's their industry? What are their best practices? Where are they at the moment? But also to know what their issues and concerns with water management and the MWA's water reform could be. My role then is to engage with that person or with that audience. So it's different to just communicating and telling them what we want to tell them. So I can start telling the story, but then I need to be prepared to listen to what they have to say as well. And then once I listen, I can find where we have both common values and differences and talk more about where we have commonality and how we might address some of those differences. As far as listening to, I have to respect that the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's role is to oversee the implementation of the Basin Plan. You know, it's a reform that 6 governments signed up to in 2012, so it's been in place as a piece of legislation for a long time. And it's designed to manage the whole of the Murray-Darling Basin in a sustainable way. So we'll find that some of those growers will support the change, some will have experienced good and bad aspects of it, and it impacts different people differently. So we have to try and identify our common ground, but also explain why there's differences, and particularly for the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, that's often about the greater good of the whole basin, and at times that means that some reaches and some areas of the community will have negative impacts. We need to acknowledge that. And so My role, I also can't promise to change the plan. That's really important, and I usually do talk about it up front. But I can ensure that those different perspectives of the community are heard by the authority through my role. So we can then try and look at how policy can be put in place to try and address those concerns.
Great, thank you so much for explaining that it's not even just about what you're saying, it's about how you're engaging and what you take from the audience as well.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with people who aren't involved in the irrigation industry, how do you change your dialogue to ensure that they feel informed?
I guess the approach remains really similar. So it's about understanding where those people come from. If it's a one-to-one conversation, it's really easy to listen and ask questions first, find out what their beliefs are, what they think is going on, and then start to have a conversation about the what is different, and using stories and anecdotes to illustrate that. So I think when I'm talking to the broader community, a common comment that I get is that we shouldn't grow cotton or rice in Australia. But when you get those sorts of comments, you can then go, well, do you buy Australian rice? Do you want to support Australian growers? And did you know that the industry has already improved its water use efficiency to double what it was 10 years ago? So you can start to explain that Australian growers and water users on the whole are really trying to do the right thing, and engage the person that you're talking to with the stories about that. We can't always connect them with a grower themselves, but we can try to encourage them to understand the position that those people are in, and then have an empathy for them and the changes that they're having to make.
Yep. Yeah, it's all about, I guess, understanding to then feel informed to be able to make comment on any of these topics.
Yeah.
So this one's more around like your communication style. How does that differ for you when you're going from presenting to, say, for example, one-to-one or a couple of individuals to a larger audience? Do you have any tips and tricks for engaging particularly those larger groups?
Yeah, so again, I make sure I know, the where the group's coming from. So I get some background from their coordinator or the convener of the meeting, so that you have a really good heads up of what to expect. And then you try and tailor your use of overheads and pictures particularly. I really prefer if I can use pictures and the stories, so that it connects with both their hearts and minds, not just a ream of facts that explain why they're right or wrong in what they do.
Yep. Yeah, the picture tells 1,000 words sort of thing.
Yeah, it sure does. And it engages people. Like if you have a beautiful picture that illustrates the story that you're telling, and particularly if that picture has, a person in it, this is the person that's responsible for that cotton crop or that improved technology that they're using, then people start to connect with that it is not just a faceless industry or someone doing the wrong thing. Here's another family person who's dedicated to what they're doing and trying to make sure that they do the best possible as well.
Yeah, perfect. And stepping into when an audience, say for example, becomes emotional or hostile, do you have any tips or tricks for when you're dealing with an audience like that?
I think that's where your background work comes in and is really important first and foremost. If you know that there's a risk that the audience can become hostile or is likely to be hostile, you'd really do your risk assessment and decide up front whether you think it's important for you to attend and safe to attend that meeting. So the Murray-Darling Basin Authority certainly has clear guidelines around when we can engage with people and when we can't. And certainly if it's an audience, there's a disconnect between you as the speaker and that group. So it's really hard to engage them. Whereas if you know you've got an individual who has differing opinions, you can deal with that much more easily on a one-to-one basis. So certainly would never ever suggest anyone go in to what they know is going to be a hostile audience and try and change a perspective in one presentation. It really isn't going to happen.
Yeah, more those one-to-one conversations.
Yeah, exactly. So if you do have someone, it's usually an individual in the audience that's starting to become hostile, often you just have to say, look, and repeat what their concern is. So acknowledge that their concern is real, and then just offer to talk to them after the meeting, making sure that you only do that if you're actually going to follow up on it. So, you can, and I always try and make time if people want to talk to me after a meeting. I really dislike having to race off, because often you've got introverts or people who just weren't willing to stand up at the meeting, or if you have had someone that you wanted to discuss with something after the meeting, you try and do that and give them the appropriate amount of acknowledgement that's needed.
So give yourself plenty of time after the meeting to get home and wrap things up, all of those parts to factor in as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So also coming back to your communication style, how does it differ when you're speaking to, say, for example, producers compared with market speculators, and then again as the general public? So like fair few different, quite distinct groups there.
Yeah, they each have different information needs. So it's doing that preparation about, what do they want to hear about? What's going to connect with them? What's the story that I need to tell them that will be useful? And acknowledging that sometimes I'm not the right person to tell that story. Again, now that I'm part of a bigger organisation with the authority, we can ask other technical experts to come in and do those presentations for us. So our role in engagement is to make that connection, identify what they really need, and then try and deliver a really useful presentation and an engagement opportunity for the audience.
Yeah, so identifying when you can, like you said, outsource some of that technical expertise that will really give them that information that they want.
Yeah, yep.
And when you're in meetings with the wider MDBA group, how do you communicate the needs, wants and questions, and particularly the questions to that wider group in a manner that will actually get the questions answered?
I think it's using multiple channels. So within the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, all levels right up to our chief executive really value engagement and absolutely value the feedback that's provided from the regions. So there's a range of ways that we can pass that on. Probably our greatest challenge is making sure that we can reassure the person who's contributed that information that things are happening when it appears that often it takes a long time. So we have formal and informal channels, whether they be written, whether they be meetings, and part of my role is to have a really good understanding of within the organisation who's working on different topics, so that we can try and make sure that we get direct information to those other staff members that need to know as well.
Yeah, so having a finger on the pulse of what's happening where and how can that be communicated to either internally or back externally as well.
Yeah, our record keeping has to be really good, because often you'll get a very short time frame to respond on what's happening in that community, what are their key issues, what do we need to know. So making sure when we have conversations with people, we keep those records and maintain our currency, I guess, of knowledge of the different regions that we work in.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. And particularly honing in on the written media, when you're utilising written media specifically, what are the things that need to be considered to ensure that messages aren't being misinterpreted?
Mm. And this is where I have to acknowledge that I'm not a really good writer. I'd rather talk to someone, because in the written form, the risk is that you get too factual and you lose the storytelling. So that's the bit that I find engages people. But if you use too many stories in your written word, that can certainly be misinterpreted, and particularly with technical content like we are dealing with all of the time, it then becomes an issue that it can be misinterpreted out in the wider community. So we've got to be very careful with the way we write, so that we don't lose that technical rigour, but we can still communicate the messages that we want to communicate.
Yeah, okay. So a bit like with some of those presentations, tapping into someone who has a really good concept of written media and can perhaps tidy things up for you, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so within the authority we have an actual separate communications team to the engagement team, so we can really focus on those different skills and hone those skills. And you know, if information is going to the media, then we also have a media team who give us support. So, as I said earlier, it's about acknowledging what role you play, but being part of a team who can then support you and make sure that we're putting our best face forward as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure you would have attended many community meetings and consultations. What do you think is the basis of talking about a cause effectively?
Yeah, I think it's about understanding that audience, what their issues are and where it's coming from, because, you know, if you don't recognise their perspective and address their position with an honesty and level of factual information, you will build up a barrier before you have the chance to actually engage them. I guess when talking about the cause, you need to capture both people's hearts and minds, so they'll then actually do something to contribute to that cause. So I think you need to be authentic, have empathy, and then connect the dots, tell the story about the cause and how they can participate in heading towards that desired outcome that you're looking for. So it does take time, it takes that connection, and then you go to the facts, develop their understanding of the issue, the outcome, and help them get there and illustrate that with examples of how other people have done it.
Yeah, nice. That sounds like a pretty good strategy to work on, probably no matter what the audience.
Absolutely.
And now here's a bit of a curveball to throw at you for our last question. What do you think is the biggest mistake that is currently being made by everyone around how we talk about water in the public domain? And if you could change that language in conversation, how would you do that?
Right. I think the biggest mistake we make, and we do it in a lot of the causes that we follow, is to expect everyone to hold the same values that we have. So in water, the way people value water can be massively divergent, and the expectations that they have can be quite divergent as well. So you then have to think about, where is our commonality in water? I think it's that I hope that everybody wants a healthy river system and a sustainable future for that river. We can differ on how that should be achieved and how we should get there. So we can have differences of opinion, understand that higher level goal is what we're heading for. And I guess when we then have the conversation, we want to try and find how we can all contribute to move forward. So I think if I could change the language and the conversation, it's to encourage everybody to acknowledge what they are doing to improve water management. So anybody who thinks that they're not part of the solution probably tend to be part of the problem, because there's something everybody can do. It may be small, it may be little, but talking to school children is probably the best way to remind you that they've already learnt that if they turn off the taps, if they have shorter showers, that they can make a difference. And I think as we grow older, we need to look to bigger things that we can do to make a difference, but still acknowledge that the small steps that we take will contribute to the future.
Yeah, definitely. What do some people say? The 1%ers that all contribute. Yeah.
Yep.
No, I love that. And I think, we can certainly learn a lot from like primary school students that just, they get it. It's fairly black and white, and they know how they can contribute. That's for sure.
And they're excited to contribute. And I think as industry people, we're often not excited enough about the contribution that we're making. So we hear farmers often say, "Oh, I'm not doing much." But then when you start to drill down into their business, they talk about the new meters that they've put in and the efficiency program that they've been part of, and the work that they have done in their dairy shed to reduce water use or to recycle water. And they get quite excited and animated about it. We've really got to be better at capturing that excitement and the stories that they want to tell about what they have done, and communicating that, because that's what captures people and helps them to understand what's being done.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of tapping into, what is ultimately, what gets them out of bed, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Monique. It's been great to have you for this Leadership is Language episode. I've learned a lot about how important it is to do that background research, and then potentially use that information to not only like form that conversation that you're having, but find those common values and that commonality to be able to share the story, and try and utilize pictures to share that story, and use the anecdotes and information straight from people themselves. So I think there's a huge lot of takeaways for everyone, because we all play a role in managing this very precious resource that is water. So thank you so much for chatting to us and sharing your water wisdom with our team at the Young Farming Champions community.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing the change.
Thank you.